It's the 6th lecture on theory and methodology of think tank. Our speaker today is Professor Yang Yaqin from the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. She is currently the Council President of Think Tank Foundation of SASS, Director of Center for Think Tank Studies of SASS, and also the Chief Expert of Innovation Project of New Think Tanks with Chinese characteristics. Professor Yang has been engaged in macroeconomic theory and policy decision-making consulting research for a long time. She's a winner of the 10th Shanghai Women's Innovation Award for year of 2018, Model Women Pacesetter of Shanghai City, Internal Survey Award for the 9th Shanghai Policy Decision-Making Consulting Research Achievement Appraisal for year of 2013, the second prize of the 10th Shanghai Policy Decision-Making Consulting Research Achievement Appraisal for year of 2015, and the third prize of the 12th Shanghai Policy Decision-Making Consulting Research Achievement Appraisal for year of 2019. She has presided over 20 national and municipal decision-making consulting research projects. In recent years, she has studied evaluation in China's think tanks, with representative works including Chinese think tanks report, influence ranking, and policy suggestions. The Power of Thought, a collection of Chinese think tanks 2019, and the Territory of Thought, an overview of global think tank development 2020. Professor Yang has successfully worked in the Institute of Economics of the SASS, the research office of the Shanghai Municipal Committee of the Communist Party of China, the Shanghai Municipal Decision-Making Advisory Committee, the office of the Shanghai Leading Group on Finance and Economics, and the Think Tank Research Center of the SASS. She was a part-time journalist and editor of the International Financial News. At present, she works as an invited expert at Hangzhou International Urban Studies Research Center, Ali Research, Shanghai Credit Services Trade Association, Shanghai Modern Service Industry Research Institute, and other units. Objectively, scientifically, and fairly evaluating think tanks, building an evaluation system of new think tanks with Chinese characteristics, setting Chinese standards, expressing Chinese opinions, and holding the discourse power of global think tank evaluation are important for guiding the healthy and orderly development of new think tanks with Chinese characteristics. For 10 years, CTTS of SASS is positioned in a global perspective, which draws on research results of international think tanks. Based on practices of China's think tanks and social structure theory, we actively explored and pioneered an evaluation system of new think tanks with Chinese characteristics for impact evaluation and ranking. We have issued annual evaluation reports for 7 consecutive years. The inputs believe that the value and the vitality of think tanks lies in their impact, which can be decomposed at decision-making academic circles, public media, international community, and other fields. Then, we build an evaluation index system covering decision-making impact, academic impact, social impact, international impact, and growth ability of think tanks, referred to as 4+1 think tank impact or 5-factor evaluation criterion. Decision-making impact of think tanks is reflected in the depth and breadth of think tanks' involvement in public policies. Academic impact in the ability to spread and use public knowledge. Social impact in the ability to lead the media and public opinions. International impact in the international vision, open thinking, and track to diplomacy, and growth ability in resource endowment, operation, and management of organizations. On this basis, we developed the second-level and third-level evaluation indicators. To some extent, the evaluation research also confirms the think tank theory and methodology proposed by the research group of Professor Pan Jiaofeng from Institute of Science and Development, Chinese Academy of Sciences. Today, Professor Yang's lecture is entitled Exploration into Influence Evaluation System of New Think Tanks with Chinese Characteristics. Please welcome. Hello everyone. I'm very grateful to CAS for holding such a series of lectures on the theory and methodology of think tanks. Today, I mainly want to share with you about exploration into influence evaluation system of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics, which has also been briefly explained by our hostess. At the beginning, I want to briefly introduce CTTS of SASS, because it's the carrier of our evaluation system. This institute was started in 2009, which is the first academic institute in China to specialize in think tank research and think tank evaluation. We started the research in 2013 and released the first Chinese think tanks report in 2014, and now we've published 7 reports for 7 consecutive years. The purpose of our institute is based on Chinese practice to construct an evaluation system of China's think tanks. Meanwhile, we will build a platform for the exchange of domestic and overseas think tanks to promote the development of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics. Therefore, this institute is mainly a think tank research platform in China, which aims to strengthen research on think tank evaluation, promote the transformation of think tank achievements, and strengthen the exchange of global think tanks. Our vision for the future is to be a think tank of think tanks with international impact. We now have 6 core products. The first is the annual Chinese Think Tanks Report, and the second is the Global Go-To Think Tank Index Report, which was first released last year, mainly about the development of global think tanks. The third is the Shanghai Global Think Tank Forum that has been held for 5 sessions, and the fourth is about the transformation of think tank achievements. That's our Shanghai Special Report on new think tanks. Another 2 are about the frontier of international think tank research and the Shanghai New Think Tank Forum. This picture shows the development vision of our institute and our main work. Next, I'll introduce from 4 aspects. The evaluation indicator system of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics. First is about the reason for the evaluation. That's the purpose and the significance of evaluating new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics. Just now, our hostess has also mentioned this. We aim to scientifically, objectively, and fairly evaluating think tanks to build the standards and benchmarks for new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics to control a commanding point of global think tank evaluation. This is also important for the healthy and orderly development of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics. In the top-level design, the opinions on strengthening the construction of new types of think tanks with the Chinese characteristics clearly stated the demand for think tank evaluation. It can guide the development of think tanks, which is a major historical mission and a social responsibility. During evaluation, we should develop standards, set benchmarks, and meanwhile identify problems. Evaluation should adhere to scientificity, fairness, and objectivity. Specific evaluation should involve subjects, contents, objects, rules, methods, procedures, and etc. And is our main work for the last few years, and the main direction of our research. To evaluate think tanks, we should first clarify the concept and the connotation of think tanks. This picture presents a Western description of think tanks. Think tanks can bridge the gap between knowledge and power. We can see that academic institutions and governments can communicate through think tanks. Besides, they can also help the communication between the public and the public policymakers. Think tanks' thinking products, including ideas, strategies, solutions, and tactics, all deserve our concern, which should be considered during evaluation. We have also studied the role of think tanks in developed countries for over 100 years. In addition, we have explored over 70 years in China, the contributions, opinions, and values of think tanks. I think that before think tank evaluation, we should deeply research and analyze the connotation and the concept of think tanks. In this picture, it shows key elements of think tank development, which are in a 3-dimensional relation, namely resources, relation, and operation. There are also specific evaluation criteria in our indicator system, and I won't go into details. We have also analyzed the difference and the connection of think tanks with academic institutions and the consulting firms, because they are overlapped, different, and connected. Think tanks, for example, must be supported by academia, but they aren't academic institutions and must directly serve for decision-making. Think tanks also have something in common with consulting institutions, and they can learn research methods from each other. We have compared think tanks, academic institutes, and consulting firms to see their similarities and differences from 8 aspects. We have mentioned that evaluating think tanks should first understand the concept of them. When evaluating China's think tanks, we should stick to a major direction or principle to balance 2 aspects. One is to keep an international perspective. Since think tanks have international standards, we should respect their law of development, so evaluation should have international vision. Besides, when we are studying China's think tanks, we must adhere to China's practice rather than mechanically apply some standards and evaluation methods. Before think tank evaluation, we have put forward these ideas and theories. Evaluating China's think tank relies on some understandings and judgment. Although we have officially put forward new think tanks with Chinese characteristics in recent 5 years, think tanks have played a role across the 70-year history of the PRC development. During founding the state by revolution, enriching it by development, and strengthening it by governance, China's think tanks have made support and contributions. In particular, over the past 40 years of reform and opening up, think tanks highly conform to the progress of reform and opening up. We can even say that they are born for reform. And reform, in fact, has also energized think tank research and development. We can see that the change of thought and the rise of innovative forces lie in the support of think tanks. Since 2013, it has been nearly 7 years, and China's think tanks have developed into a new stage. The speed and scale of development in recent years have been constantly expanding. Back to the significance of think tank evaluation, we have summarized it into 3 aspects. The first is about standards and benchmarks. Think tanks mainly serve for the party and the government, so evaluation should also support the government to select think tanks, monitor and manage them by a standard and a reference system. That's the first point. Besides, we should promote the healthy and effective development of think tanks, since they have a law of development. Through evaluation, we should identify problems in think tank development and explore modes, channels, and methods for think tank management. In this way, we can promote new think tanks with Chinese characteristics. The third aspect is about the core of think tank evaluation. China has now actually moved to the center of the world stage. So do our think tanks. Then think tank evaluation should stand at the commanding head to hold the discourse power. I have introduced some understandings of the evaluation of China's think tanks, and only high-quality think tank products can improve the modernization of national governance capacity and give full play to the role of giving political consultation and enlightening people, providing a yardstick for counterparts to promote the development of think tanks, and a reference system for decision-makers to use think tanks are the functions of our think tank evaluation. During the evaluation, we have to clarify the advantages and disadvantages. Some think tanks or their products are misleading decision-making, so we have to find and solve them, and remind the government to resist the noises from them. Next is about think tank evaluation and ranking at home and abroad. What's the current situation of think tank evaluation? We have also done a lot of analysis in recent years. Global think tank development in recent years has been developing rapidly, while that of think tank evaluation is relatively slower. But in the last 20 years, its development has been faster. There are mainly 4 evaluation methods: subjective evaluation, objective evaluation, comprehensive subjective and objective evaluation, and user evaluation. I will make a brief introduction to those Western evaluation methods. The first one has a large influence on China. Global Go-To Think Tank Index report is published every year, which is subjective evaluation led by James. The second is a mainstream evaluation model, that is objective evaluation. The third is the comprehensive subjective and objective evaluation represented by Leibniz Institute of Germany. The fourth is user evaluation of South Korea. They are all very representative. Here, let me introduce subjective evaluation about how do we recognize strengths and current problems. We have studied this in recent years because subjective evaluation has a large impact in China. We have early learned from it. It's a comprehensive description of global think tanks, and especially for Western think tanks. There are a lot of reasonable points, but it has big problems with accessing think tanks in the developing countries. The participants in evaluation have prejudice, or their research on the decision-making system of the developing countries represented by China is not thorough enough. Objective evaluation is a more scientific approach, using modern analytical tools for empirical research on think tank impact, which is more general. Since 2000, economists and public policy experts from some important institutions have been analyzing and studying the impact evaluation of important think tanks. To show you simply, some experts analyze the quality of key think tanks to reach evaluation of think tanks. Objective evaluation has several indicators, which will be applied to later evaluation methods, such as media citation and attendance at congressional hearings, which is a different case from that in China. This method also has advantages and is objective, but is weak in terms of quantification. Besides, China's decision-making mechanism is different from that of Western countries. So many decision-making indicator systems are not necessarily suitable for China's think tanks. The third is comprehensive subjective and objective evaluation. Leibniz Institute carries out annual evaluation of some think tanks, including academic institutions. It embodies the similarity in academic evaluation and fully reflects the uniqueness of think tank research, which is also our concern. User evaluation emerged in 2005 when South Korea set up an organization called National Research Council for Economics, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Actually, it's a non-government department, but closely related to the government. It evaluates achievements and operation of its subordinate think tanks, and we have also learned from it, because user evaluation is a key factor in think tank evaluation. For the role of a think tank, its users have a great say. However, some think tanks have given too much attention to users' comments, affecting independence and fairness of think tanks. When learning from overseas think tanks, we should grasp this point. Some domestic evaluation institutions of think tanks are also outstanding. In addition to CTTS of SASS, which is China's first academic institution researching think tank evaluation, some others have been emerging in the last 5 years, such as China Academy of Social Sciences Evaluation Studies, CASSES, and a think tank research center and the School of Public Policy and Management, Tsinghua University. a think tank evaluation center of Nanjing University, and another one under the Sichuan Academy of Social Sciences. We also did a lot of communication and discussed some common issues, proposing different research thinking and evaluation methods. For example, CAS-SES has established an indicator system, AMI, mainly focusing on 3 factors: attraction, management, and impact, to evaluate the value of China's think tanks and their core sense. Actually, when communicating with them, we found that their indicators, in particular attraction and management, are difficult to acquire. And the factor impact learns a lot from some core indicators of impact evaluation proposed by CTTS of SASS. The evaluation system of Tsinghua University is similar to objective evaluation. It uses some big data methods to build big data indicators, to evaluate some think tanks with a big role in society, public opinion, and media. This system clearly shows their values. An indicator system of think tank evaluation called MRPA of Nanjing University has 4 first-quarter indices: the governance structure, resources, achievements, and activities of think tanks. In fact, this system also has difficulties in acquiring indicators. The think tank evaluation of Sichuan Academy of Social Sciences is 2 years later than ours, and are similar to ours in many aspects. They also evaluate think tanks' impact and expand social influence into a finer indicator system centering on public opinions. We focus more on academic impact, while they on professional impact. But in fact, it's more or less the same. These are some evaluation institutions and methods in China. Then, in the third part, I'll introduce the impact evaluation system of new think tanks with Chinese characteristics. This has been a result of exploration over a decade of CTTS of SASS. We have a theoretical system for evaluation, that is the social structure theory. We have quoted this theory and analyzed the circles of the whole system of China's think tanks. We have divided think tanks into inner, middle, and outer circles, according to our unique policy system, cultural foundation, and social relations. So, due to their different relationships with decision-makers and the various communication channels with governments, China's think tanks vary. We observe that think tanks of the party, government, and the military are mostly in the inner circle and are closely related to the government. Some may be subordinate bodies of the government, or social think tanks that are closely related to the government, by unique communication channels with governments created through interpersonal connection. Think tanks in the middle circle and decision-makers are impartial or independent of each other. These think tanks have channels for communication with decision-makers, without being directly influenced by them. Cases in point are think tanks of institutes. In the outer circle, we focus on think tanks of colleges, some social and corporate think tanks, which are less related to the government, with fewer communication channels with the governments. The 4+1 evaluation model or 5-factor evaluation model is mainly used. A think tank's value and its effect on decision-making and society can be evaluated by its impact. Think tanks have decision-making, academic, social, and international impacts, so the evaluation gives priority to the impacts, including decision-making, academic, social, and international impacts, and growth ability, simply listed here. Decision-making impact is the core function of think tanks. Among the 5 functions of think tanks, there is giving political consultation and suggestions, largely reflected in decision-making impact. In our 4+1 evaluation model, decision-making impact has the greatest weight, 40%. Academic impact shows the ability of theoretical innovation and lays the groundwork for think tanks to play a better role with a weight of 20%. Social influence directs social opinions and bridges the public and the decision-maker. Its weight is also 20%. International impact asks think tanks to, in the long run, go globally and exert track to diplomacy. So we think that the international impact is also very important and has a higher weight for research on international relations. For general think tanks, its weight is 20%. Growth capacity is a reference indicator because they attribute way of organization, management mode, and ability to integrate resources of think tanks are important support and conditions of their impacts, which are more or less embodied in the 4 impacts. So growth ability has no weight, but is an essential factor of think tank evaluation. This table shows the model's first level, second level, and third level indicators. Second level indicators are reflected in several aspects. For example, in decision-making impact, we should evaluate how our results and thinking products are adopted by decision-makers to generate good social benefits. Third-level indicators are per capita or annual average ones. Due to different sizes, we should consider the profits through the input-output ratio. Academic impact has indicators at 3 levels. Here are indicators of social impact. International impact has first, second, and third level indicators. Growth ability is the attribute of think tanks. Older think tanks have deep accumulation. The research field should also be considered. Our impact evaluation of think tanks has 5 dimensions, including 5 first level, 12 second level, and 33 third level indicators. We have shown these indicators. In our discussion, we have different opinions because of plural and diverse think tanks and their different focuses of function. Some focus on track to diplomacy, some on political consultation and suggestions. So we should evaluate think tanks in different categories and levels, with various ways to reflect their differences. For example, our top think tanks of the party and the government should have a high weight of decision-making impact. When we made such an evaluation system for China top think tanks, we suggest the weight was at least 70%. Through the development of various think tanks, we find that social and corporate think tanks care more about their social impacts. That's the case. Think tanks of colleges focus on talents, theoretical innovation, and international communication, so their weights of academic and international impacts are high. The standard and indicator setting of the evaluation indicator system of new think tanks with Chinese characteristics are introduced above. We have learned and referred to key policies and documents related to national think tanks. Our evaluation principles and indicators can be reflected in China's official documents issued in the recent few years. For example, the functions of think tanks required by national pilot top think tanks are reflected in our evaluation system. This figure shows the impact evaluation system of think tanks with Chinese characteristics. We have introduced the 4+1 model, which is the objective evaluation standard of think tanks. It needs an objective standard to judge and evaluate the development of think tanks. that is, for impacts and one growth ability. With regard to methods, we combine multiple rounds of subjective evaluation and objective evaluation. For subjective evaluation, the subjective determines the accuracy, justice, and scientificity. Therefore, when selecting experts, we pay attention to several aspects. First, users of policy consultation products are so important that have a high weight. Second, think tank experts and personnel of operation and management conduct peer review. Third, the public and media are important elements in evaluation. This shows the combination of subjectivity and objectivity in think tank evaluation. Here are the 5 fundamental principles in evaluation. First, we should promote suggestions by evaluation. We don't evaluate think tanks to rank them, but to set the standard and a benchmark for helping new think tanks with Chinese characteristics with sound and orderly development. Second, think tanks are imported goods, and think tanks of Western countries have been promoting decision-making recently. So we can learn a lot from the international development of think tanks. Think tanks should thus be evaluated from a global perspective. Third, it should be oriented by decision-making, because they mainly serve for public policies. Specifically, China's think tanks serve major strategies and policies of the party and the government, for which decision-making impact dominates. Fourth, national conditions should be considered, instead of Western standards in evaluation. For instance, attendance at Congress can't be an indicator for China's think tanks. The channels of China's think tanks for policy consultation and suggestions are mainly internal reference and participation in the formulating government stipulations. So national conditions should be reflected. Last, think tanks should be easily evaluated, with a few key elements. Think tanks are diversified, but the mentioned impacts should be achieved by all of them. So we use a few key elements in the evaluation. These key elements have been introduced in detail. China's political decision-making system is totally different to Western countries. So our indicators, especially second and third level ones, should express the features of China's think tanks. Then let's talk about the evaluation process. Our think tanks are subjectively evaluated in multiple rounds, with objective data before conclusions are reached. In this way, our evaluation process makes sense. Annually, it takes about a year to go through the whole process. The first round of questionnaires covers over 300 organizations in 30 provinces and cities of different categories, which is wide enough. Then it moves on to the second round of subjective questionnaires. We select from over 500 think tanks, over 700 this year, about 160 key and flourishing ones, for more than 100 experts to evaluate in the second round. In the 2 rounds of questionnaires, with reference to the database, we collect massive data for subsequent processing. Fourth, it moves on to user evaluation. Based on the second round of subjective questionnaires, key users are asked to score selected think tanks. The fifth is the expert review, in which we organize many seminars of experts to analyze and verify the evaluation results. The expert tank or network has a global coverage, including experts in think tanks, experts specialized in think tank content, and those in the party and government departments. Throughout the 5 processes, we will conduct a nationwide field survey Annually, we visit over 100 think tank organizations, of which chief experts and personnel of think tank operation and management are interviewed for communication. In this way, we try to reduce the subjectivity of questionnaires. This is the first round of questionnaires in 2018 with open and transparent data. This figure shows our data, indicators, and their weights, which are also open and transparent. Our evaluation can be supported by transparent data. This figure shows the whole evaluation process. First, we conduct a subjective evaluation assisted by objective evaluation. Second, we sort out data, and subjective evaluation includes user evaluation, peer review, third-party evaluation, and self-evaluation. Here are our data from 2017 to 2018. 160 think tanks were selected from 500 to be reviewed by experts. At last, we ranked them and sorted out the top 50. We surveyed over 700 think tanks in 2019 and generated an internal ranking with the top 50 given. After due consideration, we didn't publish it. Impact evaluation ranking was made in different categories and levels. Except the overall top 50, we also ranked the top 20 of the 4 impacts respectively. That is, top 20 in decision-making impact. In terms of think tanks' attributes and features, we ranked them in systematic impact. We ranked national, regional, college, and social think tanks. Then we move on to professional impact. Think tanks explore different fields, so we divided them into 8 fields and ranked them. There's also issue impact, proposed by CTTS of SASS. We have always felt that the ability to set issues is the core of impact. China's think tanks discuss major national strategies and policies, or even play better roles. For example, in the Belt and Road Initiative, coordinated regional development, and China-US trade disputes, which think tanks are paramount. This is our impact rankings. Also, we have invented 2 nominations. The one is Best Think Tank Program. Great think tank impacts are reflected in many aspects. Some are well-rounded, while others are specialized, especially with S&T development. Think tanks are being transformed with new features and tools. With regard to good features and trends of think tank development, we award Best WeChat Platform, Best Think Tank Forum, Best Think Tank League, Best Think Tank Journal, and Best Report on Decision-Making Consultation. As an institute of think tank evaluation and research, we are supposed to heed the new trends of think tank development. The other is new think tank nomination. Think tank evaluation has requirements on time. Those have been found for over 3 years can be considered. With the boom in think tanks, some new ones exploded in size and played critical roles, like Scientech Innovation Board and the new over-the-counter market. New think tanks need chances to be evaluated by activation and impact. Here are the top 50 think tanks in 2018, most of which are national top ones, occupying nearly 40. There are also specialized new think tanks. These fast-growing think tanks also exert non-negligible social impact. For example, global think tanks have obvious social impacts. Pango Institution, Ali Research, and etc. are all new social think tanks, which have been emerging recently on a large scale. At last, let's talk about the understanding of the problems in the evaluation of new think tanks with Chinese characteristics, and what we should do next. The development of think tanks are closely related to the times, and objectively reflect the demands of the times and decision-making. Particularly, the new era marks a new journey for the development of new think tanks with Chinese characteristics. So think tanks are flourishing. Though recent China think tanks report reveals some problems, such as failing to adapt to and keep up with the times, that hinder their high-quality development. In general, the rapid development of China's think tanks is called for by the times and decision-making. Correspondingly, think tank evaluation is an important but difficult task. Why? As mentioned, in evaluation we should study the contents and clearly define think tanks. Current think tanks might not be precisely defined. After all, think tanks develop in many aspects, and some of them don't show explicit functions and effects. They always sway among the political sector, the academic sector, the media, and the public. So we should better define and grasp the object of evaluation, which is a difficult point. The second is the third-party role of evaluation institutions, such as the CTTS. First of all, how to embody the fairness, scientificity, and authority of evaluation institutions is still difficult to form a national consensus. The third party should be widely accepted. I think this part is still in progress. The third difficulty is the scientificity of the evaluation method, rules, and procedure, which is a very difficult exploration in itself and needs much more research. Meanwhile, the key to the discourse power is the scientificity of the method and procedure, which is still somewhat questionable. So we think that the evaluation of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics is still in the process of exploration and development. Although the CTTS is the first to do this work, we can't guarantee that we have no problem in many of our evaluations. But our evaluation is based on the research on global think tanks. Our goal is how to more reflect its scientificity, objectivity, and fairness, which is also the direction of our efforts. The three problems have just been talked about and won't be repeated here. In particular, I want to emphasize the difficulty of the topic of think tank evaluation, which is what we are encountering now. If we evaluate a think tank, for the situation of it, such as information, we should have a unified, open, and standardized information channel for collection and processing, which is a difficulty. I think that all our think tank evaluation institutions have encountered such a difficulty. The most prominent one that has been discussed most is the decision-making impact of think tanks. For example, how to get and determine the internal reference number and the situation of decisions adopted by the government is the biggest difficulty. But we are determined to make the evaluation of China's think tanks into a Chinese version. The construction of the evaluation system of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics is to establish such a Chinese version of think tank evaluation. Although we don't really agree with the Global Go-to Think Tank Index report of the University of Pennsylvania, people who research think tanks always talk about it. I don't think it's a global version yet, and its standards have been questioned in many aspects. I think for the evaluation of China's think tanks, first of all, we can't say that we can make a global version right away, but at least we make a Chinese version of the evaluation of China's think tanks. So from our point of view, the direction of efforts or the full requirements for the think tanks emerged in the think tank evaluation in the future are as follows. First, we should correctly define the categories and objects of think tank evaluation and implement classified grading and hierarchical evaluation. For the object to be evaluated, is it a think tank? Which category does it belong to? What kind of object does it serve? So we need to make a subdivision study on the think tank. On this basis, our evaluation can be fair and objective. That is what an evaluation institution may have to do. We can't evaluate a think tank if not understanding it. Second, considering the level of government or decision-making, we should cultivate independent third-party think tank evaluation institutions to enhance the evaluation impact, authority, and discourse power. I think the evaluation must be the independent third party. For example, the CTTS is an institution affiliated to SASS, so it's also questioned by others that if we can achieve third-party independence. We have been working hard on this. Of course, we can't just be very proud to say that we can do it, but we've been trying to achieve third-party independence on the basis of research. So in recent years, we have also evaluated the SASS and related think tanks. But we automatically screen out the indicators of this institution in our evaluation, trying to develop to an independent third-party think tank institution. The third task is to establish evaluation criteria that conform to the development law of think tanks and promote scientificity and objectivity of evaluation. How can the evaluation criterion conform to the law of think tank development? As for this question, I think there is a lot of room for research. In recent years, our center has been paying attention to and translating some cutting-edge works of international think tank research. Then, through the translation, we fully understand and explore something regular in the development of think tanks to continuously correct some evaluation indicators. For example, our 3-level indicators may need to be perfected, but we are still very confident about this evaluation standard until today, because we think the overseas experts on think tank research have a consensus on the impact evaluation of think tanks. That is, the impact is regarded as a core element of think tank consideration and evaluation. So I think we may pay more attention to the further improvement of the 2nd and 3rd level indicators in the next step, and we will have confidence in the standard. 4th, with the combination of subjective and objective evaluation methods, we should insist on open, justice, and fair evaluation. Today, university rankings have many different orientations. Then, from the perspective of think tank evaluation, our orientation is also worth studying in the next step. As for the overseas evaluation, because evaluation itself is very subjective, on certain objects, the subjective evaluation is an international method. But in our evaluation, it's the most important to reflect our objective criteria. So in the following evaluation, the methodology should be diverse, and the evaluation procedure and rules should be impartial, open, and fair. These are some of my thoughts on the development of China's think tank evaluation. What I want to share with you are the above 4 aspects. My general feeling is that China's think tank evaluation still has a long way to go. Our future work on think tank evaluation needs the think tank counterparts and our users, especially the decision makers, to support us. Because I think a lot of our information standards still need a lot of support from the decision makers. That's all for today's presentation. Thank you all, and thank you, Editor Yang. Thanks to Professor Yang Yaqin for her wonderful lecture. I was absorbed in listening, and I have many questions to discuss with Professor Yang. From the perspective of construction of influence evaluation system of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics, Professor Yang decomposed the comprehensive embodiment of the influence and the value of think tanks into decision-making, academical, social, and international impact, setting up a 4+1 model or 5-factor evaluation criterion for the impact evaluation of new think tanks with the Chinese characteristics. As far as I am concerned, I think this is a pioneering behavior of think tank evaluation in China, and it's also a very useful exploration. At the same time, in the above course of the lecture, Professor Yang comprehensively presented and combed the evaluation systems in China and abroad, which reflects that the evaluation system of the CTTS has an international perspective and is supported by the concentric zone theory, which is particularly commendable. I have 2 more questions, and could I discuss with you, Professor Yang? I'm a senior editor of the Institute of Science and Development, Chinese Academy of Sciences. The institute represents a top think tank of CAS. The team, led by Professor Pan Jiaofeng, has proposed the DIS theory and methodology of think tank research. From the point of view of evaluation, what do you think of the DIS theory and methodology? In addition, one of the points I see from the think tank evaluation is the impact on media, including social impact and international impact. These two parts are presented from the perspective of media in terms of the indicator decomposition. So, in the think tank construction, think tanks actually include research and communication, which are two important parts of think tanks. The Bulletin of the Chinese Academy of Sciences is a think tank journal. How do you evaluate the role of think tank communication on think tank construction? These are my questions. In fact, both of those questions are very important, and I think they are difficult to be explained clearly just in a few sentences. I try to answer your questions from my understanding, which may not be correct. The first is related to the methodology just mentioned, that is, the methodology of think tank research. The methodology proposed by Professor Pan Jiaofeng actually has been elaborated in our report of think tank research this year. Think tanks are now developing to this stage, and the S&D is developing, especially the application means is changing. So I think it's very necessary to research and summarize the method of think tank research. Well, I really appreciate the method of President Pan. We are also understanding such a method. In our evaluation, in fact, we didn't understand President Pan's method very well at first, but we felt that certain aspects of ours are very compatible, such as the information collection. We did a lot of work on this. Our research object is think tank, and the research object of each think tank is different. How can the collection of information be comprehensive? The collection of information should be comprehensive and focuses on some core elements instead of everything. I think the collection of information has two elements: comprehensiveness and screening. During information collection, we should distinguish between the core elements which are key to our work and the superficial information. After the information collection, we should screen out and process the data. I think this is a major problem to be solved by think tanks. This is based on some theory research, that is the theory support for information screening. In the information screening, we produce our judgment. For example, in terms of think tank evaluation, after we collect a large quantity of information about think tanks, we should judge the thinking products, like the core and competitive decision-influencing achievements or superficial results in the process. From our professional perspective, I think this should be solved in the second and third levels of the methodology of think tank research. We should remove false or unimportant information and make professional judgment. I think there is another important aspect, that is scientificity, which means the think tank research can't just follow others and we can't obey what's told. We have to respect science and objectivity. This is some understanding of mine. I think the methodology of President Pan is very systematic. I haven't read his monograph carefully yet. This methodology should be studied hard, which guides our following think tank evaluation. That's my answer to this question. The second question is actually difficult. As for the research and the communication of think tank research, on the one hand, I believe think tanks should exert influence. The thinking products as just mentioned, for example, the conceptual, tactical, and strategic thinking products in different forms are studied. In addition, we should produce some products for decision makers or the public. At the same time, we should make these products better understood, accepted, and transformed into public decisions, and some ideas influencing the public. That is the communication of think tanks. So I think today, after the development, the form, way, and the channel of communication are quite different from the traditional ones. What we've been focusing on for the last few years is that think tanks are increasingly combined with the new media in communication. As for the thinking products, such as the S&T think tanks that we have come into contact with before, which are very professional, how can they formulate and implement public policies in aspects such as artificial intelligence? The decision makers may not be very professional in this respect. So how do we play a role through think tanks and transform some professional concepts or strategies into some viewpoints and thinking ways that can be understood by the decision makers? I think there is a transformation process in communication, which means that there is a transformation process from the think tank achievement to the acceptance by the decision makers. So a problem that is discussed in our think tank circle is the transformation and the communication of think tank results. The talents in this channel are actually lacking now. They should not only understand the professional discourse system, but also translate the system into some expressions or discourse systems that can be understood by the public and the decision makers. This link, I think, is actually where think tanks can do more. This is the transformation of results. The communication includes the one at the level of decision-making or the internal reference. What we are talking about now is more about the channels of internal reference. Another channel is the public channel, that is what Editor Yang is doing, or even new media. I think what we should pay special attention to right now is the communication content, which can't be professional and lengthy expression, but that can be accepted by the public. Besides, we should communicate internationally and should have a value judgment that is recognized by the international community. We should not talk to ourselves, but should have international language and discourse system, thus telling the Chinese stories and promoting China's think tanks. I think this is the biggest difficulty now. We may now talk about the communication of think tanks in our country, but when the products are displayed in the international community, besides the language, the value judgment is also a problem. In addition, our way of expression also needs to be considered and paid attention to. Did I express it clearly, Editor Yang? I think there may be 3 or 4 levels of communication, and the requirement varies at different levels. Of course, they also have something in common. In a word, I think the think tank content not only should be scientific, but also is very important in terms of its communication. To deliver good concepts, ideas, tactics, and strategies to the decision makers and the public, the think tanks or institutions should bear the social responsibility and historic mission. That's my opinion, Editor Yang. Thank you, Professor Yang. I have gained a lot today and also have a lot of questions to communicate with you later. That's all for today's lecture. Thank you for your attention.